Good evening and welcome to this episode of the Fivefold Podcast. I'm your host, Michael Weedman, and I would like to say thank you for taking the time and joining us tonight on the podcast. The Fivefold Podcast focuses on the fivefold ministry and the importance of that ministry in today's society. We believe that there is still a need for apostles, for prophets, for pastors, for teachers, for evangelists. They haven't ceased. They're still in operation today and necessary for the success of today's church. So join with us as we dive into this episode of the Fivefold Podcast.
What is up, everybody? This is not Michael Weedman. You might be able to tell by the tenor of my voice, the timbre that is there. If you're watching online, you might be able to tell by my good looks. However, you may be like Isaac, and you could be saying, you feel like Jacob, or excuse me, you feel like Esau, but your voice sounds like Jacob. You're right. I am not Michael. I have snuck in to his studio. At the moment, he's out of area. He doesn't know. So keep an eye out. If you see him coming around, please be sure to let me know so that I can ditch out the side door before I get busted. You might not know this. He's just a slight bit bigger than I am. Now that he's joined public harassers, police, he's got a little more muscle and a little less fat, but to each his own. If he wants to be less attractive, he's welcome to do that. It is great to be with you, to get to be with Michael Weedman's audience. He is a phenomenal guy, and it is a privilege to be able to sit in with him. He is a huge part of the network that we started. Matter of fact, he was in the ground level as we got this thing kicked off, and we've got some great things coming up in the future. If any of us can actually settle down and pay attention to this, the Of God Men Network has some really cool things in the making for the future. But I didn't come to talk to you about that, and I don't have a lot of time to talk because he could be just around the corner. So I better get what I got to say, and I better get it out there quick. You know what I'm saying? Because I'm going to hit the road, and I'm going to have to hit it hard and heavy. Pedal to the metal, if you know what I'm talking about. I got to get out of here before he wrings my neck. And if you've known him, his kids could probably wring my neck as well. And that's not counting the rest of his family. I mean, talk about a family of giants. No, so I recognize, right, this podcast, and what a cool idea it was that he would start a podcast and title it the Fivefold Podcast, talking about the fivefold ministry. What a great idea. And I recognize he has branched out into, that was the original content that he covered, but now he's branched out a little bit beyond that, talking about the things that are impacting the church and how the church is impacting the world today. Very important topics, and I'm thrilled that we've got that as a part of the Of God Men Network, and really cool. And talking about that, I was reminded today, there was a gentleman a long time ago, back before I ever started pastoring to begin with. I pastored in Uvalde, Texas for, I don't know, about 3 years. And then we resigned, and I never wanted to preach again. I mean, not only didn't want to pastor, I didn't want to preach again. I wanted nothing to do with ministry. About 5 years later, the Lord would begin to work on us. And about 5 years later, we actually would start another church, which eventually ended up here in Seguin, Texas. However, before I ever pastored the first time, there was a gentleman, my wife, while we were dating, she knew, and he was a big guy. He was probably about the size of Pastor Weedman before he, butchered himself and lost all that weight. And before then, He was about that size, and he was pretty tall. Matter of fact, this guy, Jim Hollis was his name. And Jim Hollis could pick up, not kidding, I saw him do it with my own eyes, he could actually pick up a vehicle. Saw him pick up the back of a car one time. Blew me away. Strong guy. But before he got in church, he used to smoke. And I think even after he got into church, he smoked for a while. It was hard for him to kick it. And he developed COPD. And that's eventually what would kill him. But Jim Hollis was on his deathbed. And it had been a while since we had connected. Life just took us different places. He was a truck driver. He's on the road. I think he probably had even moved. And for myself, now I'm pastoring and just involved in a whole bunch of other stuff. However, Jim and I, when I was young, about 17 or so, we would go to nursing homes together. And we would visit the elderly and those that were down. Some of them weren't so old, right? But they had physical conditions and families just couldn't take care of them. And so we would go visit these folks. Jim Hollis is now on his deathbed. He's got COPD. He doesn't have long to live. We've lost contact. He doesn't have my number. I don't have his number. I can't tell you the last time we actually connected. However, he did have the church's number that we used to attend together. He called the church, or he may have had Shane Chance's number. Shane Chance and I have been friends since he was 6 and I was 7, and we're still close to this day. At least that's what I'll tell you. So he calls Shane, and Shane goes up to see him, and Shane calls me and says, "Hey, I just got off the phone, and I've gone to see Jim Hollis. He's got the COPD. He doesn't have long to live." And he'd asked if I thought you would be able to go see him. Here's his number. And I didn't bother calling. I just got up and went to the hospital. And when I got there, he was asleep. He never woke up. I stayed there, or never woke up while I was there. He was just out, and I stayed for quite a while. And he had a woman there. They weren't together except just friends. And none of his family was there. Nobody else, just this one woman. And I went over and I sat down and I talked to her and talked a little bit to him and prayed a little bit, and then came home. And, I lived a good while from where the hospital was. And I want to say it was probably the next day. And I left my number with the woman that was there with Jim and said, "Hey, if he wakes up, give him my number, have him give me a call. I would love to talk to him." And I went home. I want to say it was probably about the next day I got a call from Jim. And the first thing that Jim is talking about is the nursing home ministry. You remember when we used to go to the nursing home and we would visit the old people? Remember when we would do this, and it was all ministry related. As far as I know, Jim may not have even been in church for the last little while. It's very possible that he wasn't. But his recollection went back to ministry. And some of the last words he would say to me was, "Brahm, don't quit. Keep going. Keep doing it. Keep plugging away." Jim would die later on that day. That would be the last conversation I would ever have with Jim Hollis before he passed. The amazing thing is, on his deathbed, his thought, first of all, was to reach out to me, who was just a teenager when we did that together. And he was several years older. But his first thought was to reach out and say, "Don't back up. Don't let up. Continue to reach out. Continue to live for God. Continue to reach into the world and to share the gospel, share the doctrine, share the word." Jim wasn't perfect. He was far from perfect, but he was right on with that. He didn't know, but at that point in my life, I was at a place where the things in the church just weren't going that great. Things were in chaos. This was not long before we would have a church split. This was not long before my life was going to be turned upside down. I wouldn't know if I was coming or going. Felt like even my own family turned their backs on me. Difficult time. But God would send a man on his deathbed to tell me, don't give up. Don't give up. It reminds me of what Paul told Timothy in 2 Timothy chapter 4, verse number 2, when he said, preach the word, be instant, in season, out of season. Reprove, rebuke, exhort with all long suffering and doctrine. Be instant, in season, and out of season. It's easy to be instant in season. That's easy. It's easy to come out of a camp revival or a camp meeting, tent revival. It's easy to come out of those being all pumped. But what do you do when nobody wants to talk to you? When nobody's caring? If you're a pastor or a minister, maybe you're an evangelist, no church is calling you. You're a pastor and people are promising they're going to show up on Sunday and they never do. What do you do at those moments? Jim had the right words. He reiterated in his own lingo the same thing that Paul told Timothy. Be instant. Keep going. What you do for Christ is the only thing that's going to last. Jim on his deathbed had most likely only that one woman. Nobody else was around. The crazy thing, you want to know what I remember about Jim? We would go out to eat, and besides him lifting up a car, but we spent a lot of time together. But what spoke the most to me was simply going to visit people that could never pay him back for his time. Investing in people. The only thing that's going to last is what you do for the Lord. Whatever your ministry is, do it with all your gusto. Do it with everything you've got. And when hell tries to take a shot at you, stand up like a former and probably future president. Pump up your fist and say, I'm going to fight, fight, fight. It's not over yet. God's not done yet. Difficult times come, but the same God that brought you through the ones in the past will bring you through these ones. Hold your head up, knowing you can rest assured Jesus has your back. Well, I thank you for taking the time. I know you thought you were going to get to hear Michael. I understand you were anticipating getting to hear Pastor Weedman and all of his great eloquence. You were probably convinced you would get to see that, what used to be handsome face back when he had those chubby cheeks. Unfortunately, you got me, and I don't have the chubby cheeks, but I do have this manly, rugged smile. Lord bless you guys. I hope y'all have a great rest of your day.
Hey, I want to say thank you for joining us tonight on the Fivefold Podcast. I pray that you've been blessed and that you have enjoyed what you have heard. Join us every week as we release new content concerning the Fivefold ministry and their place in today's church. You don't want to miss this. The Fivefold Podcast. God bless.